Advocate Atul Pandey, Secretary Advocate Amal Jaltare, Convener of Study Circle Advocate Makarand Agnihotri, Member of Bar Council of Maharashtra and Goa Advocate Parijat Pandey, and all esteemed members of the bar, students of law, and dear friends. The High Court Bar Association Nagpur extends a warm welcome to everyone present here for this session of Study Circle, organized in the memory of late Shri Vinod Bobde, senior advocate and a great legal luminary. On this occasion, we have with us Her Ladyship Honorable Srimati Justice Urmila Joshi Falke to deliver a lecture on the Bharatiya Saksha Adhiniyam 2023, which is an apt topic in the present legal scenario where the coming into force of the new law and evidence, that is the Bharatiya Saksha Adhiniyam 2023, and the repeal of the age-old Indian Evidence Act has started showing its reflections on the pending litigations. This is the second session on the new criminal laws, the earlier being the study circle delivered by His Lordship Honorable Justice Vinay Joshi on the Bharatiya Nagarik Suraksha Sanhita 2023. I, Sakina Daud, on behalf of late Shri Vinod Bopre, Senior Advocate Memorial High Court Bar Association Study Circle and the High Court Bar Association Nagpur, am thankful to Her Ladyship Justice Joshi Falke Madam for sparing her valuable time to give us an overview of the Bharatiya Saksha Adhiniyam 2023 and guide us with its niceties. I request President of the HCBA, Advocate Atul Pandey, to welcome our keynote speaker, Honorable Justice Joshi Falke Madam, with a sapling. Laws are not static. They are dynamic and ever-changing. The Parliament enacted the Bharatiya Saksha Adhiniyam 2023, replacing the Indian Evidence Act 1872, and introduced significant changes to reflect upon contemporary needs. I am glad that Her Ladyship has consented to be with us to share greater details on this extremely significant subject. On this occasion, it is my privilege to introduce our erudite speaker. Her Ladyship Honorable Srimati Justice Urmila Joshi Falke completed schooling at Ahmednagar and secured a degree in LLB from Pune University. She was called to the bar in the year 1991. Her Ladyship practiced both on the civil and criminal side while also working as a contributory lecturer at New Law College at Ahmednagar. Her Ladyship worked as a public prosecutor in the District and Sessions Court at Ahmednagar from 2006 to 2008 until she joined the judiciary as a District and Sessions Judge on 15 June 2008. Her Ladyship was elevated as an additional judge of the High Court of Bombay on 6 June 2022. Her Ladyship, an industrious judge, has been a wonderful asset to the Nagpur bench of the Bombay High Court. Her scholarly judgments reflect her deep knowledge of law. Her soft and encouraging demeanor helps and inspires juniors like us to appear and argue matters confidently before Her Ladyship. We are extremely grateful to have Her Ladyship with us today to share her astute knowledge and experience on the subject. I now request our esteemed speaker to enlighten the bar on today's topic.
Good evening to all. It was told that only 0 to 5 years practitioner will be there, but it seems that more than that. The listeners are there, but I will candidly admit that I can't give a lecture. Only we will discuss some provisions, and we will definitely endeavor to take into account what are the new changes in the proceeding, and thereafter I think you would be satisfied by that. Advocate Shri Atul Pandey, President of HCBA, Advocate Amol Jaltare, Secretary, and Advocate Agnihotri, and all the participants. First, I would like to thank the organizer for this opportunity. They feel fit to call me for this discussion. Today's topic we are considering, that is overview of Bharatiya Sakshya Adhiniyam, and that is the old Evidence Act. We all know the Evidence Act originally passed in India by the Imperial Legislative Council in 1872 during the British rulers, contains a set of rules and allied issues governing admissibility of the evidence. The Indian Evidence Act, now replaced by the Bharatiya Sakshya Adhiniyam, that is commenced from the 1st July 2024. We all are aware about it. Before going to the what is evidence law, we have to first understand what is meant by the evidence and what are the golden rules of the admissibility of the evidence. Three golden rules of the Evidence Act are: evidence must be confined to the matter in issue, hearsay evidence must not be admitted, and best evidence must be given in all cases. Besides these three golden rules, the rules of the Evidence Act states about validity, sufficiency, and the authenticity. The rules of the evidence are very closely related to the principles of assessment and highlight the important factors around evidence collection. The best evidence rules only applies when a party seeks to prove the contents of the document sought to be admitted as an evidence. The best evidence rules provides that the original documents must be provided as evidence unless the original is lost, destroyed, or otherwise not in a position to produce the same. So, what are the two fundamental concepts? The law of evidence is prerequisite. We all know the law of evidence is prerequisite for any criminal or civil law. The law of evidence has established two fundamental concepts. One is relevancy and another is admissibility. So these two fundamental concepts we have to consider. Just now I have stated that first, before endeavoring into the concept of the evidence law, we have to see what evidence means. So, before diving into the concept of the evidence law, it is necessary to understand the definition of the evidence in general. The term evidence was derived from the Latin word evidere, that is means lucidity, clarity in presentation, and the ability to prove the facts in question. In its original sense, word evidence refers to the state of being evident, that is, in simple language, that is plain, oblivious, and well known. Whatever, in a simple language, whatever we can present it in a simple language which is understandable to everybody, that is the evidence. Sir William Blackstone defines evidence as any matter of fact, comma, the effect, tendency, or design of which is to produce in the mind persuasion concerning affirmative or disaffirmative of its existence of or the existence of some other matter of fact. So this is the definition which is defined by the Sir William Blackstone. Thereafter, the evidence is defined as anything that lends to verify or deny existence or non-existence of a stated fact. The party who claims the presence of a fact must prove its existence, whereas the party who denies it must disprove its existence or establish its non-existence. Means if plaintiff says or the prosecution says something, then it is a burden on the prosecution or the plaintiff to prove that this fact exists. And when accused said or the defendant said no, this is not in existence, then it is he who has to prove or the establish that it is not in existence. That is the in simple language that what we can understand. But in a very simple language, it is described by the Honorable Apex Court also in the case of Kalyan Kumar Gogoi versus Ashutosh Agnihotri and others, reported in AR 2011 Supreme Court, wherein the Honorable Apex Court observes evidence is used in a common parlance in three different senses: as equivalent to relevant, as equivalent to proof, and as equivalent to material, on the basis of which court comes to a conclusion about the existence or non-existence of that fact or of a disputed fact. So in a very simple language, it is stated by the Honorable Apex Court that what is evidence as equivalent to relevant. What is relevant is evidence. Then as equivalent to proof. What the proof comes before the court, that is evidence. As equivalent to material, on the basis of which the court has to come to the conclusion that yes, this fact is in existence or this fact is not in existence. So that is the we can say that is the test which is determined by the Honorable Apex Court. So now we are in a new era. Now the Indian Evidence Act is not there. Now we have to consider the Bharatiya Sakshi Adhiniyam. So by replacing the Evidence Act 1872, the Bharatiya Sakshi Adhiniyam simplified, streamlined, and modernized the rules. For example, electronic evidence. We were not aware of how the electronic evidence is to be produced, how the electronic evidence is to be adduced, or how it is to be proved. But then now the new act has simplified it. How that certificate should be there, in what manner that certificate should be there. We will see in detail later on. But that is this new act which has simplified, streamlined this Evidence Act before us to understand it simply. Now, what are the changes? For some provisions are deleted from the Indian Evidence Act, like Section 82, Section 88, which was the presumption as to the telegraphic message. I don't think any of us has used that. Say the Section 88 of the Indian Evidence Act, which was the presumption as to the telegraphic message. Then Section 113, proof of cessation of territory, that is also not used by us. Then Section 166, power of jury on assessors to put questions, that is also not used by us. Then what are the changes made in three facet? The three changes are made under the three facet under the new act. Major changes are made in three facet: status of documents and electronic evidence. Thereafter, Section 65B, that is electronic evidence, and new act is under new Section 63(4)(c). There is Section 27 under the new act. It is Section 23(2). Initially, there was Section 24, 25, 26, and 27 on the confession. Now it is consolidated and it covered under one section part wise. So that are the changes. Now we have to see what is the definition of the document. Initially, we know the paper of peace is a document. We always used to see that when agreement to sale is there, sale document is there, that is the document. But now the definition, the old definition also we have to see, and the new definition also we have to see. Section 3 of the Evidence Act defines document as document means any matter described upon any substance by means of letters, figures, or marks, or more than one of those means intended to be used for the purpose of recording that matter. The juniors who are there now, for them I will say here, when you are reading any definition now, that comma, semicolon, or the full stop, everything has its own meaning. So while reading that, we have to read in that manner. Why that comma is there, we have to think over it. Why that comma was there, or why that comma is there, why semicolon is there, and what is the purpose behind that, that is to be understood by us. Under the new act, under Section 1 into bracket 1 into bracket D, document means any matter expressed or described or otherwise recorded upon any substance by means of letters, figures, or marks, or any other means by more than one of those means intended to be used or which be used for the purpose of recording that matter, and included electronic and digital records. So what is the change? That digital and electronic record is also included in the document, in the definition of document. That is the change by the new act. Because that document now, the next step is we have to prove that electronic evidence, that electronic document. So first we have to understand the definition of a document. What is included in that in the definition of document? Thus, the definition of document explicitly includes electronic and digital records within the scope of what constitutes a document. This means that any information expressed, described, or recorded electronically, such as through computers, smartphones, or other digital devices, falls under the definition of document. So, I will repeat again it. The definition document explicitly includes electronic digital records within the scope of what constitutes a document. This means any information stored or expressed in the record electronically recorded, such as through computers, smartphones, other digital devices, under the definition of document. According to the Indian Evidence Act, electronic evidence is considered a distinct kind of evidence alongside oral as well as the documentary evidence. So, how that electronic evidence is to be considered? So, especially considering the understanding of Section 65B in view of decision of the Honorable Apex Court in the case of Arjun Panditrao Khodkar, versus Kailash Gorental, reported in 2027 SCC1, the new act explicitly includes electronic evidence under the category of documentary evidence based on definition. The purpose is to broaden the application of electronic records and legal evidence. We will also see the relevant parts of that judgment for our understanding. What the Apex Court says about the electronic evidence, how it is to be adduced, how it is to be proved, that is there. Intentionally, I have brought that judgment along with me. So, the earlier judgment was held to be per incurium in that, or except the Anwar Bashir judgment. So, what the Apex Court says, Section 65A and 65B occur in Chapter 5 of the Evidence Act, which is entitled of Documentary Evidence. Section 61 of the Evidence Act deals with the proof of contents of the document and states that the contents of document may be proved either by primary or by secondary evidence. Section 62 of the Evidence Act defines primary evidence as meaning the document itself produced for the inspection of the court. Section 63 of the Evidence Act speaks of the kind of types of secondary evidence by which documents may be proved. Section 64 of the Evidence Act then enacts the document must be proved by primary evidence except the circumstances therein hereinafter. Section 65 of the Evidence Act is important and states that secondary evidence may be given of important words, the existence condition or contents of a document in the following cases. Which are these following cases? Section 65 differentiates between existence, condition, and contents of a document, whereas existence goes to the admissibility of a document. Contents of a document are to be proved after a document becomes admissible. So there are stages. First, that document should be an admissible document. It is to be produced. Thereafter, it is to be produced in a proper manner. And thereafter, contents of the same should be proved. Section 65A speaks of contents of electronic records being proved in accordance with the provisions of Section 65B, and Section 65B speaks of admissibility of electronic record, which deals with existence and contents of electronic records being proved once admissible into evidence. So everybody has to read this judgment if they want to expertise in this field, because nowadays the electronic evidence will be there. We are day to day we are observing that CDR reports are there. Thereafter, various documents are coming before us, various communications are coming before us. For example, we are looking into the matter from, for example, we take the example of the bail application, wherein we are considering the WhatsApp chat, Instagram chats, then how it is to be proved, then how the custody is to be there, then how it is to be produced, then what type of certificate should be there. All these factors we have to consider in that. So everybody must read this judgment of the Honorable Apex Court, Arjun Pandit Rao Khotkar versus Kailash Kushan Rao Gorental, that is of 2020. So, especially considering the understanding of Section 65B in view of decision of the Honorable Apex Court, which we have already just now read. So, it broadened the application of electronic records in in the manner of the legal evidence. Electronic records are now considered as a primary evidence. So, how it is a primary evidence, that also we will in a glance we can see that the before electronic evidence or the circumstantial evidence or the evidence in the nature of dying declaration, evidence in the nature of documentary evidence, first we have to see what is evidence, what evidence means. So definition of evidence expands the scope to include statements given electronically or as oral evidence, and it also explicitly incorporates electronic or digital records within the category of documentary evidence. So now only oral statements are not there, the electronic statements or the any statements in the form of the electronic is also as an evidence, but it is to be proved and established by the parties. Section 4 of a new act now states about the relevancy of facts forming part of same transaction by new act or a relevant fact. We all are the students of the law, we all are now practicing the law, so we know what is relevant, what is irrelevant, what is relevant fact, what is not a relevant fact, what is a disputed fact, what is admitted fact. So it includes, the new provision includes facts connected to both a fact in issue and a relevant fact. So fact in issue we have to find out from the proceeding, and what is the relevant fact, that is also we have to find out. Then Section 22 of Bharatiya Suraksha Adhiniyam consolidates and refines the provisions relating to confessions in criminal proceeding. Just now I said initially there was a Section 24, Section 25, Section 26. We always said that it is hit by Section 25, it is hit by Section 26. The confessional statement is not admissible. The confession before the police officer is not admissible. Then we routinely we used to say that it is an extrajudicial confession, it is very weak type of evidence, unless there is a corroboration, it cannot be accepted. So every day we argues that you argues that we listens that it is not, it is very weak type of evidence, and it is not acceptable. Otherwise we are also saying that it is a confession before police, it is not an admissible. Section 27, as soon as it comes before us, we say no, this part is not admissible, only part as to the fact of discovery of the fact is only admissible. But then now always I always says that this is not admissible, why you are reading that? I always ask the counsels coming before me that why you are reading this is not an admissible portion. Then what is admissible portion? Admissible portion is only to the extent that regarding the discovery fact. Just now Mr. Jaldari was there before my court, we were considering that. What is Section 27? Why the Section 27, since the Privy Council judgment Pullukari Kotaya till the just now I shared that judgment with on the dais with the prosecutors and everybody, that recent judgment of Justice Padiwala is there. How evidence of the investigating officer is to be recorded. So that judgment is very important for the defense also and for the prosecution also. How evidence is to be recorded, and if that evidence is not recorded according to the observation in that judgment, what is the evidentiary value of the same? That is to be seen, because under Section 27 there always to be a voluntary statement of the accused. Show me the cases wherein the investigating officer has deposed that accused has given a voluntary statement which was reduced into writing by us in presence of the panchas, and thereafter it was explained to the accused, and thereafter accused put his signature, panchas also put his signature, thereafter he led us as the accused led us, therefore we followed him, and he has shown the place wherein the article was concealed. the laid us, concealed, and the voluntary statement. These are the important facets of that section. But means at least I never came across that the evidence of the investigating officer was recorded in that fashion, in that manner. In exceptional cases, it was recorded in that manner, but it should be like that only. That unless and until these ingredients are not there, how we can accept that section 27 Panchanama? And that should be an argument before the courts. So that Panchanama is to be proved in that fashion. If a place is accessible to all, what is the value of that Panchanama? If it is not accessible to all, if there is no statement of the voluntary statement of the accused, then what is the evidentiary effect of that? So we are considering section 22 of Bharatiya Suraksha Adhiniyam consolidates and refines the provisions related to confessions in criminal proceedings from the corresponding provisions in section 24, 28, 29 of the Indian Evidence Act, which were separate provisions dealing with different aspects of the confessions, whereas section 22 of the new act combines these provisions into a single section. So these are the changes as far as the new act is concerned. Then section 24 of the Bharatiya Saksha Adhiniyam, old section 30 of the Indian Evidence Act, confessions affecting persons making it and others can be considered now against the absconding accusers. So this is the change. We till today we were saying that the confession by the co-accused is not admissible against the accused, but now the new section says confessions affecting persons making it and others can be considered now against the absconding accused. In view of insertion of explanation 2, which reads as a trial of more persons than one held in the absence of the accused who is absconded or who fails to comply with a proclamation issued under section 84 shall be deemed to be a joint trial for the purpose of that section. So that is the change. Initially it was not there. So now the absconding accused is also considered in that. So this is the change. Then section 32 of the Bharatiya Saksha Adhiniyam, old section 38 of the Indian Evidence Act, that is the relevancy of the statements as to any law contained in including electronic or digital form. It states that statement about foreign law can be contained in books published physical and electronic or digital form. This indicates it ensures that the law stays relevant with technological advancement and the increasing accessible legal documents in the digital forms. Thereafter, section 57, the president of SCBA specifically asked me to deal with the secondary evidence. So the separate note is prepared by me on the secondary evidence. So he specifically day before yesterday requested me and said that, Madam, okay, you are taking Indian Evidence Act, but we want some enlightenment on the secondary evidence. I asked him that I am not enlightening. I have to enlighten myself. But then I have prepared something, so we'll share it with you. Section 57 of BSA or the Bharatiya Saksha Niyam deals with primary evidence. We know what is the primary evidence, what is secondary evidence. It includes detail about how electronic or digital records are treated as the primary evidence. According to new provision, electronic or digital records would be treated as a primary evidence in following circumstances. So there are 3 or 4 explanations, and that explains us in what circumstances it can be treated as a primary evidence. So explanation 4 states, where an electronic or digital record is or are stored simultaneously in various files, file A, B, C, D, or sequentially in multiple files, then each such file is a primary evidence. Then explanation 5 states, where an electronic or digital record is produced from proper custody, such electronic or digital record primary evidence unless it is not disputed. Then explanation 6 states, where a video recording is simultaneously stored in electronic form and transmitted or broadcast to another, each of the stored recording is a primary evidence. Then explanation 7 states where an electronic or digital record stored in multiple storage including temporary files is also a primary evidence. So these are the explanation. Initially these explanations were not there, so it is difficult for us to understand what is the primary evidence, what is the secondary evidence, what are the preconditions for adducing the secondary evidence, and what is to be complied with before adducing the secondary evidence. So the new act introduced significant modification in the electronic evidence, bringing about substantive changes as primary and secondary evidence is concerned. It is important to note that subsection 4 of section 65 maintains mandatory requirement of certificate as specified in the new act. Day before yesterday, I have pointed out APP Udeshi that in spite of the clear provision, the investigating officers are again issuing or obtaining the incorrect certificates, because in there are two parts in the schedule A and schedule B under section 64 2C, section 63 4C, and second part, that is schedule B part B, it is to be for the hash value and everything, and part A is for the contents of that document. But as usual, the investigating officer has given it under the part A. He has only complied with the part A, and so I have pointed out to the prosecutor. So, despite of this clear provision, clear schedule, the investigating officers are committing such type of mistakes, and so look into that. So, as per the request of the president of SCBA, we will consider now the what is secondary evidence, in what circumstances that secondary evidence is to be adduced. So, under what circumstances a secondary evidence is admissible in evidence and notice to produce. What is notice to produce? So, proof of contents of document, we are aware the contents of the document may be proved by primary or by the secondary evidence. Section 62 of Indian Evidence Act means the document itself produced for the inspection of the court. When it is to be produced for the inspection of the court, when secondary evidence, when it is not within the reach of the person, when it is lost, when he can't produce, there are several circumstances under which we can produce the secondary evidence. But what is the precondition? What is the precondition to produce the secondary evidence? Then section 65 states about secondary evidence may be given of the existence, what are the conditions in which that secondary evidence is given, and how the contents of the same are to be proved. There are several. Now I am not reading that, but there are several. That if the document is lost, if document is in a several parts, and it cannot be produced before the court for the inspection of the court, or it is in the custody of the person from whom he can't take a custody of that document. There are so many conditions. Then what is the notice to produce? Section 66 of the Old Evidence Act talks about the notice to produce. So for how the notice is to be given, it is regarding that secondary evidence of the contents of the documents referred to in section 65 clause A shall not be given unless the party proposing to give such secondary evidence has previously given to the party in whose possession a power the document is, or to his attorney or pleader, such notice to produce it as is prescribed by law. If no notice is prescribed by law, there is such notice as the court considers reasonable under the circumstances of the case. So, notice shall not be required in order to render secondary evidence admissible in any of the following cases. Then that cases are given. Then how and when to lead the secondary evidence? So, there is a recent case wherein the apex court has considered how the secondary evidence is to be admitted, or what type of admissibility will be there. So, the Honorable Apex Court recently in Vijay versus Union of India 2023 15 SCR, wherein by referring the earlier judgment, some ingredients or the some guidelines are given in that. So we will peruse that. Primary and secondary evidence stands explained by a constitutional bench of this court in Cement Corporation of India Limited versus Puria, reported in 2004 bracket complete 8 SCC 270, as the former being the evidence that the law requires to be given first, the latter being evidence that may be given in the absence of that original evidence when a proper explanation of its absence has been given. So initially we are under obligation to adduce the primary evidence, but in certain circumstances only we can adduce the secondary evidence, and for before adducing the secondary evidence, that circumstances are to be established by the parties that yes, due to this reason, the party is unable to produce the primary evidence, and therefore they be permitted, or he may be permitted, she may be permitted to adduce the secondary evidence. The terms primary and secondary evidence apply to the kinds of proof that may be given to the contents of the document, irrespective of the purpose for which such contents, when proved, may be received. Section 63 of the Evidence Act gives an exhaustive definition declaring that secondary evidence means and includes the 5 kinds of evidence mentioned therein. Section 65 of the Evidence Act allows secondary evidence to be given of the existence, condition, or contents of the document under the circumstances therein mentioned. So, after perusing the various judgment, the apex court has deduced the following principles relevant for examining the admissibility of secondary evidence. One, law requires we have seen initially that best evidence rule, that is deduced. Law requires the best evidence to be given first, that is a primary evidence. Then section 63 of the Evidence Act provides a list of the kinds of documents that can be produced as secondary evidence, which is admissible only in the absence of the primary evidence. If the original document is available, it has to be produced and proved in the manner prescribed for primary evidence, so long as the best evidence is within the possession or can be produced or can be reached. No inferior proof could be given. If that is available, that is to be given. Below that, nothing is acceptable. A party must endeavor to adduce primary evidence of the contents, and only in exceptional cases will secondary evidence be admissible. The exceptions are designed to provide relief when a party is genuinely unable to produce the original through no fault of that party. When the non-availability of a document is sufficiently and properly explained, then and then only the secondary evidence can be allowed. Secondary evidence could be given when the party cannot produce the original document for any reason not arising from his default or neglect. When the copies are produced in the absence of the original document, they become good secondary evidence. Still, there must be foundational evidence that the alleged copy is a true copy of the original. So, merely producing the secondary evidence by seeking permission is not sufficient. It has to be established that yes, it is a genuine copy. It is the true copy of the original document. Before producing secondary evidence of the contents of the document, the non-production of the original must be accounted for in a manner that can bring it within one or other of the cases provided for in the section. Last is important. Mere production and marking of a document as an exhibit by the court cannot be held. We always say that mere production of the document is not sufficient. Proof of the contents of that document is to be given. So mere in short, we in simple language is a mere exhibition of the document is not sufficient. It is always we generally we says that no. This is only a mere exhibition of the document. Contents are not at all proved, therefore it cannot be accepted. So that is again deduced by the apex court that yes, mere production or marking of a document as an exhibit by the court cannot be held to be due proof of its contents. It has to be proved in accordance with the law. So this is the sum and substance of the secondary evidence, which is determined or the explained by the Honorable Apex Court. Then there are the judgments on the other aspects also as far as the secondary evidence is concerned. Then there is the judgment of Cement Corporation, just now we have seen. Then Then there is the judgment of Rakesh Mohindra, wherein it is a party who wishes to lead secondary evidence. The court is obliged to examine probative value of the document that is determined. Then M. Chandra versus Thangbantu, that is 2009, 2010, 9 SCC 712. This is also on the secondary evidence. Thus, the law on the secondary evidence is very well settled by the Honorable Apex Court. But this is the 2021 judgment is much helpful in how to produce, how to adduce the evidence, how the proof of the documents are to be proved, contents of the documents are to be proved, in what condition it is to be proved. That all you can get from this judgment. As initially we have seen that judgment of the Arjun Khotkar on the electronic evidence. It explains us what is the electronic evidence, in what circumstances, how it is to be proved, what are the requirement of that, and thereafter it is always helpful to us. So these are the mandates regarding the secondary evidence. We have already discussed regarding the requirement of the certificate under section 60 or 65B, and now 63 4C. There are schedules, and in that schedule two parts are given, part A and part B. Part A needs to be filled by the party introducing the electronic record, and part B needs to be regarding the hash value. Much I experts. So what it gives us, what the new act gives us, the explicit recognition and regulation of e-evidence under Bharatiya Sakshi Adhiniyam, which streamlined legal process by providing clear guidelines on its admissibility and authenticity. We know that 65B is only stating about the electronic evidence, that certificate is to be appended along with this, but there were no guidelines in what manner it should be, and there was chaos because of that. So on several occasions it was produced without certificate. Then always question was raised when that certificate is to be produced, when at the time of investigation, or at the time of recording the evidence, at the time of the trial. Then all the chaos was there. So clear guidelines and its admissibility and authenticity is clarified by this new section. Despite clear provisions under the new act, of course there are some difficulties before us regarding the evidence integrity. Question of integrity will be arise there. Thereafter, the question regarding the tampering will be there. Storing will be there. So these are the challenges we have to face. But keeping in mind that we have to keep in mind all this, we have to proceed along with this evidence, because we should be a technically expert persons, because we all are using the smartphones and everything, tabs, smartphones, everything we are using. So nobody will accept that you are not expert in the technology. So that challenges are there, that challenges we have to overcome, and we have to adjust with this new proceedings. The another important provision, we have already talked about section 27. Section 27, the new section is 23(2). So just now I shared, Mr. Jaltari was also there, that we have discussed in one of the appeal that what are the ingredients of section 27, in what manner the evidence is to be recorded. And again I will repeat that in none of the case we came across that the investigating officer has stated, yes, the accused has shown his willingness to make a statement and therefore I called to Panchas, and in presence of Panchas he gave a voluntary statement that I have done this and I have concealed this article at this place, and come with me, I will show the place. So what is evidence? He has given a statement. And he asked us to come. Therefore we went along with him. Then he took out the knife from which was kept on the roof of his house, and then we took it. We draw on the Panchanama, and this. So this is not the requirement. What is the requirement of section 27? It states, it is stated long back by the Privy Council, that is Pullukari Kotaiya judgment. So we all aware about that, and it is still followed by all the judgments. Then the new judgment, just now I shared that judgment of Justice Pardiwala is there, which states in what manner the evidence of the investigating officer should be. So what are the ingredients to be before the court? That yes, he gave that he showed his willingness to make a statement. Thereafter, panchas were called. Thereafter, he made a voluntary statement. That voluntary statement is reduced into writing. Thereafter, he led us. And we followed him. And thereafter, he shown the place where he concealed the article. Thereafter, that article was took out, and thereafter, it was seized, sealed, and thereafter the Panchinama was drawn. But it never happens. It never come before the court. In some cases, some investigating officer, of course, they took the efforts, and it is of course on the dependent upon the prosecutor also. The expert prosecutor can extract it from the mouth of the witness. That is the skill. Because while cross-examining the witnesses, the defense is permitted to ask the leading question. Prosecution can't. So prosecution has to extract the answer from the mouth of the witness without putting a leading question. So that is the skill. So according to me, the skillful person is the prosecutor, who is the architect of his case. So what are the ingredients of that section? The fact of which the evidence is sought to be given must related to the issue. The fact must have been discovered. The discovery must have been made in consequence of some information received from the accused and not by accused own act. A person giving the information must be accused of any offense. He must be in custody of a police officer. The discovery of an act must be deposed to, and only that portion of the information which relates to the discovery is admissible. Not he has committed the murder of such and such person. That is not the admissible portions. Sometimes it is read before the court that yes, this is the statement. Thereafter, the material aspect comes as to the admissibility of the dying declaration. So, dying declaration, we are having the very guidelining judgments, or very important judgment. Lakshman versus State is there regarding the medical endorsement. Thereafter, Moti Singh versus State of UP. It is a old judgment, AR 1964, Supreme Court 900. Then Kushalra versus State of Maharashtra, AR 1958, Supreme Court is there. So these are the guiding judgments for admissibility of the dying declaration. Then the important factor is the regarding the circumstantial evidence. So always day to day we are considering the circumstantial evidence. Always the defense counsel, there is no single circumstance, madam. There is no single circumstance to connect the present applicant with the alleged offense. Then prosecutor comes and say, no, madam, there are CDR reports. There is last seen evidence. Then there is the extrajudicial confession. Then these are the circumstances. Sometimes 2-3 circumstances are there. Sometimes one circumstance is there. Then whether the last seen circumstance is sufficient, whether it is to be corroborated, whether the extrajudicial confession is there, in what circumstances it is admissible, that is to be seen. It is the circumstantial evidence. If you have seen the judgment of Trimukh Maruti Kirkan versus State of Maharashtra, that is 2006 All MR Criminal 3510, wherein the Sterlite's judgment of the Privy Council was considered, and it is held in that the prosecution is not obliged to adduce the evidence which is beyond the control of the prosecution. So prosecution has to adduce the evidence which is in their control. So but circumstantial evidence, the prosecution has to fulfill all the circumstances, the chain of the circumstances which unerringly points out towards the guilt of the accused. The circumstances should be unerringly points out to there should not be any escape. There should not be any loopholes to say that no, accused is not guilty. So unerringly it should be point out towards the guilt of accused. So that is the circumstantial evidence. I would like to share the some factors or some in the from the English author, that is the Sir Alfred Wills. Sir Alfred Wills, in his admirable book Wills on Circumstantial Evidence, lays down the rules regarding the circumstantial evidence. What he says: the facts alleged as the basis of any legal inference must be clearly proved beyond reasonable doubt, connected with the facts factum probandum. So he says that the facts alleged as the basis of any legal inference is to be drawn there. The circumstances of such a nature that the inference should be from that circumstances. The burden of proof is always on the party who asserts the existence of any fact which infers legal accountability. Then, in all cases, whether direct or circumstantial evidence, the best evidence must be adduced. Then, in order to justify the inference of guilt, the inculpatory must be incompatible with the innocence of the accused and incapable of explanation. So, that circumstances should be like that. There is no chance for the court also. There is no opportunity for the court also to infer but to the guilt of the accused, and none that. If the circumstances are such a nature, then only that circumstantial evidence is helpful. In short, circumstances on which party relies upon shall unerringly points out toward the guilt of the accused. That is the nature of the circumstantial evidence. Then the Evidence Act. We some are practicing in the civil side also. Some are practicing in criminal side. As far as the civil side is concerned, we are always came across old section 91, 92 and new section 94 and 95 of the Act. It is regarding the evidence of terms of contracts, grants, other disposition of property reduced in the form of documents. Then section 95 says exclusion of evidence of oral agreement. When document is there, we have to prove that that documentary evidence prevail over the oral evidence. Thus, the two sections, however different in some particulars, section 94, that is old section 91, applies to all documents where they purport to dispose of rights or not. Section 94 applies to the documents which are both bilateral and unilateral, whereas section 95 is confined to bilateral documents. See, the Lord Bacon says how evidence is to be there, or he says in his Maxim Regulations, while regulation number 23, wherein he said, the law will not couple and mingle matters of speciality which is of inferior account in law. That means best evidence is to be adduced, which is inferior is not helpful to any of the parties to get a relief from the court, or for the relief. Then the another aspect in the Evidence Act is burden of proof. To whom burden of proof is there? How burden shifts? The person who asserts the fact, he has to prove the fact. Regarding the existence, we have seen. Regarding the non-existence, the other party is saying that it is not, the fact is non-existence, he has to prove the same. So burden shifts. Sometimes burden shifts. We are having examples where our presumptions are there, but to attract the presumption also, at least foundational facts to be proved. It is not. For example, we take the example of section 29. Section 29 of the Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act. Merely because she is saying that yes, my modesty is outraged by the accused. He was there, I was there, and such thing happened. But foundation facts are to be proved there. Then and then only that presumption will attract. Section 138. If he says that yes, I have given the hand loan, thereafter he issued the checks, I have deposited the checks, it is honored. Thereafter I have issued the notice. Then after receipt of the notice also, he has not repaid the amount. So say offence under section 138 comes into operation after the notice period is over, not before that. So 138 offence commences as soon as 15 days over, he has not paid the amount. But for that purpose, foundational facts are to be proved. Foundational fact that there was a friendly relationship. Out of that relationship, hand loan was obtained. He was having that much money to give someone that hand loan, and then only that presumption will attract. Otherwise, not. So these foundational facts are to be proved to attract the presumption. So this is the sum and substance of the Indian Evidence Act. We are always using that. So many of you are using it very effectively. So I was not initially itself. I have clarified. I am not here to teach anything, but we are only discussing what are the provisions, what are the changes, how we have to cope up with the electronic evidence, and what are the challenges before us. So that is the thing we have to deal with. And so, what is the then duty of the lawyer? What is the duty of the counsels? So the daily practice in the courts not only gives training to us or to the advocates to interpret the rules, but also adopt the conventions of courts. In experience, would play a vital role in administration of justice to strengthen and develop qualities of intellect, character, forbearance, and patience, which are very important in the practice of law. Specialized nature of work gives added advantage and gives benefits to broaden perspectives. One of the most important factor is imposed upon an advocate is to uphold the interest of a client fearlessly by all fair and honorable means. So, for our client, we have to put our 100%. When he is correct or incorrect, we are not concerned about it. But whatever he came with to us with utmost faith, I have heard from my seniors that they always used to say that office of the advocate is not a kirana shop. That the people will enter as soon as he sees the office of the advocate, but he choose the advocate by intentionally. He decides at home only. There is no, I want to avail the services of that advocate. It is not a kirana shop that समोर दिसला आणि गेलो आणि घेऊन आलो. It is not like that. So that is to be kept in mind while we are doing the practice. So with utmost faith, the people are coming to us. We have to give our 100%. He may be prosecutor, he may be a judge, he may be a defense counsel, he may be a counsel for the parties, but the utmost duty is to put our 100% to give some relief to him. After all, getting the relief is not always in your hand, but at least that satisfaction is there that yes, I have done my 100%. I have applied the law very correctly. I have attempted to research something, and thereafter I applied it in a proper manner, and that is the advocacy. From my experience, I will say, if this is practiced by you or this is followed by you, nobody will be here to look at back. Everybody will stay forward. Everybody will be successful, because we always say this is a noble profession. So in a noble profession, we put our 100% for our client. Definitely, it will give result to you. So that is all I have to say before you today. Thank you for giving me this opportunity.